So today we're going to be looking at the Pacific Theater Part 1. Obviously, like I said, this is U.S. history, and so we know that the United States officially joins the war, World War II, I should say, in December of 1941 after the Pearl Harbor attack. We're not really going to focus on Europe. I would say that's more of like a world history thing, but kind of to give you a bit of a rundown of what happens in Europe, is that I would say by 1944, it became very clear that Germany and Italy were going to lose the war. At that point, it was really only a matter of time. In April of 1945, you have Hitler, who's going to very famously commit suicide. And on May 8th of 1945, Germany is going to officially surrender, which leads to what we call VE Day or Victory Europe Day. So even though the war in Europe is over by May of 1945, the war in the Pacific, specifically between the United States and the Japanese, is not. And so we're really going to be focusing on the Pacific Theater and that Pacific war front, both today as well as Monday. So after Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor, Japan attacked American airfields in the Philippines, and they landed their troops in the islands as well. Even before the Pearl Harbor attack had officially occurred, the United States was prepared that there's a very good possibility that they're going to have to go to war with the Japanese. Even before the Pearl Harbor attack, the United States had General Douglas MacArthur, stationed in the Philippines, kind of preparing for war on the off chance that an attack was going to happen. Even though the Japanese had surprised the United States at Pearl Harbor, if you look at FDR's speech, and it's kind of hard because obviously you don't have pictures of it, but if you look at like what was originally typed up, it said that Pearl Harbor and the Philippines were attacked. Well, FDR ended up crossing the Philippines out because on December 7th of 1941, only Pearl Harbor and Oahu was attacked. The Philippines were not. It wasn't until after the Pearl Harbor attack and the United States had officially declared war with Japan that the Philippines were actually attacked by Japanese troops. And the commander of the Americans and the Filipinos defending the Philippines, again, that would be General Douglas MacArthur, retreated to the Bataan Peninsula, where they unfortunately were not able to necessarily fight back, and MacArthur is going to have to surrender 75,000 men. One of the advantages that Japan had, especially at the beginning of the war, and just kind of like how the war worked out, was that the Japanese understood the terrain a lot better than the Americans did. They were used to more of the islandy feel. They understood how the land worked. They knew kind of how to hide, how to maneuver. And the Americans really didn't understand that. And so it's going to take the Americans some time before they kind of like figure out, hey, this is what we have to do, before we defeat the Japanese. And so as a result, the Japanese are going to have the upper hand on America for the first few months of the war. Because again, they started the attack and also because they understood the land and the territory that they were fighting on much more so than the Americans actually did. And so, like I mentioned, the Bataan Death March, 75,000 troops are going to be surrendered, and they're going to be forced to march to the prison camp that's 65 miles away. To give you an idea of how far 65 miles in, that would be like walking from Temescal Canyon High School to about the city of Poway down in San Diego. That right there would put you at about 65 miles. Also, keep in mind something about the Philippines. The Philippines are very hot. They're very humid. So not only are they walking in very hot and humid conditions, you can guarantee that the men that are being forced onto this death march are not being treated very well, right? It's kind of like if they drop like flies, oh well, sucks to be you. And thousands, of course, are going to die along the way, whether they starve, whether it's because of disease, or whether it was the fact that they were murdered. These prisoners of war were not treated well. In Saving Private Ryan, we see Captain Miller who lets that one German prisoner of war go, even though the other men disagreed with him. They were like, hey, like that guy, killed Wade. We should kill him. Miller is like, no, we should honor the rules of the war, which is if somebody surrenders, they are technically a prisoner of war. Does that mean everybody abides by those rules? No, absolutely not. And that, of course, doesn't just come from the Japanese. It also comes from some of the Americans, the Germans, the Italians, the British, the French as well. But technically in the rules of war, if you were surrendered, you're a prisoner of war. You're supposed to be treated, with an ounce of respect. But for these American troops, that doesn't happen. So as a result of the Pearl Harbor attacks, the United States kind of realizes like, hey, we've got to do something. We got to do something big. We got to do something bold in order to show that like you basically can't mess with like the USA. And so James Doolittle, shortly after that Pearl Harbor attack, is going to organize a bombing mission in Tokyo, Japan, that's going to become known as the Doolittle Raid because it is named after him. the city of Tokyo is big, and the reason why it's major that they decided to go after Tokyo is the capital city of Japan. It'd be like the same if, like, instead of attacking at Pearl Harbor, which was just nothing more than a military base, the Japanese decided, hey, we're going to go after Washington, D.C. It says a signal, or sends a signal when you're going to go after the capital city of a country. So the fact that the U.S. was going after Tokyo, it was really kind of to send that message of, like, we might be down, but we're not down for the count, and best expect you're going to get a fight. Hideki Tojo, not Hideki Tojo, but one of the generals who, kind of very famously made a remark, after the Pearl Harbor attack, like, we've awakened a sleeping beast. Like, they knew that, like, even though they had, started the war, that, like, the U.S. wasn't going to go down without a fight, and it certainly wasn't going to be easy. There were two major goals with that Doolittle raid. The first one was to boost American morale after Pearl Harbor. Obviously, when any country gets attacked, it's definitely a big deal, and of course it was for the Americans. And a couple of weeks ago, I had mentioned that quote that FDR had sort of mentioned at the beginning of the war, kind of warning the Americans, listen, we're going to have to fight this war on two fronts. We're going to face many losses before we see any victory, but essentially, if we all come together and do our part, hey, guess what? We're going to be able to, do well in this war effort. And that was really the whole point of the Doolittle raid. Were they expecting to make huge waves, by going after Tokyo? Yes and no. Like, they wanted to send a symbolic symbol, but didn't mean like they were suddenly going to win the war or have the upper hand. That definitely wasn't the case. But it was like a, hey, look, again, we're down, but we're not down for the count. So if you join the war effort, if the women go to the factories, if you start rationing, if you start doing your war bonds, if we all start doing our part, we're all in this together, we can all win the war. And that's essentially what that Doolittle raid was meant to do. The second one, of course, was to expose the Japanese vulnerability to attack. So even though the United States had been surprised at Pearl Harbor and a little bit at the Philippines as well, it kind of takes away that element of surprise. The Japanese were depending on it, but the second the war officially starts, the Americans kind of sent a message like, you got us the first time, don't expect for it to happen again. The turning point in the war is really going to come at the Battle of Midway, which is going to take place about 6 months after Pearl Harbor. And the reason that this is called the Pacific War or Pacific Theater is because the U.S. and the Japanese are really going to be fighting specifically in the Pacific Ocean. You might be thinking, well, isn't it just a bunch of water? Well, no, there's also a bunch of islands as well. You have Southeast Asia that's going to kind of be a focus of a little bit of the war. But the Battle of Midway is for the island of Midway. And this is going to be significant for a few reasons. One, it's going to stop the Japanese advance into the Pacific. So once Pearl Harbor was attacked, the Japanese are moving closer and closer to the West Coast, right? So California, Oregon, as well as Washington. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the U.S. is able to sort of stop them from advancing forward. And pretty much, right after that, the U.S. is going to force the Japanese back, and back. So even though the war is going to last like a good 4 years, about 6 months after Pearl Harbor, it became very clear that the Japanese were going to have a very difficult time, winning the war or even doing well against the Americans. So there's a few reasons why the Battle of Midway was so significant. It took place between June 4th and June 7th of 1942. Like I said, about 6 months after Pearl Harbor. It's widely regarded as the most important naval battle of the Pacific Campaign. The United States Navy decisively defeated an Imperial Japan, and the attack inflicted permanent damage on the Japanese Navy. Again, something you have to remember leading up to this. In 1938, the United States places an embargo on Japan. The reason that they do it is because of the rape of Nanking. They're also not happy with the fact that Japan is slowly but surely conquering territories in Asia. When they do that, this is going to dwindle the amount of resources that Japan has big time. If you remember that document that we looked at a few weeks ago, document A, where it shows the resources Japan got, whether it was petroleum, steel, and iron, they relied heavily on the United States. And by 1941, they were getting very little iron, very little steel, very little petroleum from the U.S., but they're also getting very little from all these other countries as well. Which means when the Japanese get a big defeat, kind of like any sort of boat or ship or plane or whatever it may be, it's very difficult for them to repair those things because guess what? They don't have the material and resources to repair them. So as a result, At the Battle of Midway, the Japanese are going to lose 4 vital aircraft carriers that were considered to be vital for the Pacific campaign. Keep in mind that an aircraft carrier allows airplanes to, to take off from, a carrier within the middle of the ocean, so that way they can hit their target a lot quicker. If we, were to get in war with Japan today, right, we're not going to launch an attack from like San Francisco. That's not going to happen. It's going to be an island like Guam. And the reason is because it's a lot closer in terms of territory than San Francisco is. Those aircraft carriers were vital because that's how the Japanese were launching attacks, like the one at Pearl Harbor. The fact that they're going to lose those vital 4 aircraft carriers and the fact that they're not going to be able to replace them, again, it's a big turning point in the war because it shows that the Americans have the material and the resources to replace something like the Yorktown that they're going to lose. The Japanese, however, don't have the resources and the ability to replace those aircraft carriers. So this is going to be huge. And again, like, you really have to look at the Pacific as being, not just a body of water, but having islands in it as well. Like with North Korea, for example, whenever like there's like talks of like Kim Jong-un nuking the U.S., they're not talking about like the mainland United States. They're talking about U.S. territories in, the Pacific Ocean. Guam being very specific because it is a U.S. territory. It's also pretty much just used as a military base. So those aircraft carriers, they were key, to launching air attacks or launching airplanes to help fight the Americans, and losing those aircraft carriers, it was huge. And in order to try to like win the war effort, the United States is going to use a technique that becomes known as island hopping. And the idea was that they would capture lightly defended islands throughout Pacific, one by one, until they hopped their way towards Japan. And this would eventually get the United States within striking distance of Japan. And you can kind of see it in the map here. You have Hawaii over here. You see Pearl Harbor is marked there, which is at Oahu. You can see over here the Battle of Midway taking place in June of 1942. So this was, again, 6 months after Pearl Harbor. And then what the U.S. did was they started hopping their way closer and closer and closer and closer to Asia. All those kind of like little stars that you see are major battles. So again, the idea is like, if we can take this island and capture it, we start pushing the Japanese back. We start moving our own U.S. resources forward. The closer and closer we're going to get to Japan, and then eventually we're going to defeat the Japanese and win this war. It's kind of one of those, it's a very slow-moving effort. Part of it is because they're little islands out in the Pacific Ocean. It's not like you can go from California to Arizona to Utah and just like go across land. It definitely takes a little bit more time and a little bit more resources. But this was a very successful technique that the U.S. was able to use, this island hopping, in order to get their way closer to Japan to hopefully defeat the Japanese on the Pacific front. And in October of 1944, in the Battle of Leaf Gulf, which I totally know I'm pronouncing wrong, the U.S. is going to be able to retake the Philippines. And the first time that and this is also going to be one of the first times that the Japanese use kamikaze attacks. So kamikazes are suicide bombers. So these are people who were going to attack with their plane into a ship, knowing very well that they were that they were definitely going to die throughout the process. And Douglas MacArthur, he returns and he's able to liberate the Allied prisoners of war. And if you look on the right here, you can tell these prisoners of war are very malnourished. They look very similar to like the Holocaust survivors in the concentration camps. And that's how like many of them look, because again, even though they were prisoners of war and there's like this code of honor where you're supposed to treat them with respect, that certainly wasn't always the case. It's unfortunate, but again, it also unfortunately does happen. Something to kind of keep in mind, this is with Holocaust survivors as well as prisoners of war as well. Oftentimes when some of the soldiers saw the guys like this, like they could tell that they were starving, they would immediately want to give them like a big bunch of food, but you can't do that because it sends your body into shock, and oftentimes people would die. So when they came across people like this, they would have to start by giving them like broth to drink, and then they could slowly but surely start introducing food back into the body, because if not, they could send it into shock and unfortunately possibly kill them. Iwo Jima and Okinawa were also two major battles that were fought between the United States and the Japanese. Okinawa and Iwo Jima are probably some of the most famous. There's been a couple of movies that have come out, as well as like memorials that are very famous from these islands. Letters from Iwo Jima, which I believe is a Spielberg flick. If not, I could be wrong. That came out a couple years ago. I'll come back to this. But I usually ask students, how many of you guys recognize this? And I would say quite a few do. This was a very famous photo that was taken at those islands. It is now a memorial and a statue in Washington, D.C., and it comes from those battles. The reason that these battles were so big was for a couple reasons. One, they were some of the closest to Japan. These were like the midway point between the Mariana Islands, which the U.S. controlled, and Japan. So the U.S. was like, hey, if we can get control of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, the idea was is that they were going to land onto Japan, boots on the ground, and to attack Japan that way. Eventually, that's not going to happen, which we'll talk about on Monday, because the U.S. is going to go a different route. If you know history, hint, hint, you can figure out what it is. But there was a lot of casualties faced on these two battles. In total, you have over 100,000 American soldiers that are going to be injured and close to 20,000 that are actually going to be killed. But one of the reasons that picture is so significant is that was the first time invaders were able to fly a flag over Japanese territory, because Iwo Jima and Okinawa were like considered actual Japanese territories, like not captured territories like the Philippines. So it was significant because it was very symbolic that like, hey, here comes the U.S., we're coming closer and closer to Japan and closer to ending the war.